Hello and welcome to Female Voices Life and Loss, where we share stories that remind us healing isn't just what we've lost. It's about what we discover along the way. And I'm Teresa Reiniger, and today I have a guest. Her name is Michelle, and she is someone whose story was a challenge. What we think we know about abilities, resilience, and purpose, she's going to share a lot of that because sometimes we get real confused on those words. Michelle is a writer, a speaker, photographer, and she's going to share so much more that she is besides all of those titles. And she has learned to live with a learning disability, which someone told her very early that it would hold her back. And you will hear in her story, no such thing happened with her. So let's dive in. And Michelle, welcome to Female Voices Life and Loss. And I'm so glad that you're here.
It is so good to be here today. I'm so excited to have this conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, you are so welcome. So let's start with the beginning. I shared that you were kind of told that there were a lot of things that you couldn't do, and you really kind of proved them wrong from what we previously talked about. So let's go back to the beginning. When
Sure.
did that happen? And when did you say, you're wrong?
Yes, that happened very early on in my life. I was diagnosed with
Hmm.
a learning disability whenever I was in kindergarten. My
Oh,
teacher,
gosh.
she noticed that I was really struggling in the classroom. I was having difficulty with counting, with tying my shoes, with writing my name, anything math related. And I was my parents'
Mm-hmm.
first child, so they didn't know what to really base development on.
Uh-huh.
There was some indication when I was in preschool that I was struggling, but we didn't quite know that it was a disability. So I go to kindergarten and it's not something I grew out of. And my teacher said, she suggested that I get tested for having a learning disability. And
Uh-huh.
sure enough, I do indeed have one. And I can remember my dad said when they called them in for the meeting, they did not give it a specific name at that point. It was more of a blanket term. They didn't call it dyscalculia. They didn't know about the limited hand dexterity, or how it was going to impact me in a lot of things in my life. But they did know when I was 5 or 6, I was not going to be a mathematician. And that was hard for my dad because he's like, well, wait a minute, 1 plus 1's always going to be 2. And they said, well, she's really going to struggle with this. And what
Mm-hmm.
that sent me with very early on in my life was I had to learn how to just be able to navigate this world that was maybe different than what my parents expected. It was definitely different than what I expected in my young life. And I had to end up repeating the grade in a different school. And I began to receive disability accommodations and support. So I had specialty instruction where I learned how to be able to do things that were based on my level that was customized for my needs.
Mm-hmm.
And I also had accommodations where I could go into the classroom. I had extended test time. I also had the test read aloud to me. All those things were designed to give my brain a chance to process the information. But it
Mm-hmm.
was really hard when I was young, especially because I was in this pit of despair. I thought my life was always going to be difficult. And I was very frustrated. I was trying to learn and I just couldn't do it. And my mom
Yeah.
and dad made me go to school, even whenever they knew I wasn't going to do well on a test or I was having problems with my peers because I also struggled socially. I went to a
Mm-hmm.
very small school district where everybody knew each other. And if you're one of them, you belonged. And it was really clear that I was not one of them and that I really struggled in the classroom. I couldn't hide that I went to learning support. And those years were just very difficult for me in school. And I can remember though, as I got older, school got easier for me academically. I was in all regular ed classes except for math, socially.
Okay.
But one of the things that started happening is I started to have my grades were really good, but the question was, well, what am I going to do after school? And that's when a lot of the stigma really started over people trying to limit me. I had a learning support teacher who did not think I could go to college because of my math.
Mm.
I started to have, she suggested a trade school, even though nothing interested me. People that were telling me, I had a psychiatrist that said, you're most likely not going to go beyond community college based on your scores.
Mm.
So a lot of that stigma happened as I was a young teen. And just there was that
Wow.
general idea going throughout school that I wasn't good enough or I wasn't going to be able to do this because of having a disability.
Wow. Yeah. And those are such difficult years as it is, but to
Mhm,
be put all of that on you as well, so hard. And I can't even relate really to what you're saying. I can only say that my daughter had a counselor one time that said, "You're not going to do that. You're not going to be able to do that." And me as a mom saying, "Oh, yes, you can." you know, just and so I could see where your parents were probably when you said that, like even though they knew maybe that you weren't going to do good on a test, they still wanted you to go. Because I can remember with my daughter,
mhm.
like, oh, you don't listen to them. We're going to keep moving forward. So I kind of like kudos to your mom and dad, even though that was difficult probably for you. But I think as parents, we just do that. We don't want our
Mhm.
children to be labeled. We don't want someone else to decide what's going to happen with our kids. And that's amazing. That piece in itself that you did not allow someone to decide your future for
Yes,
sure. Yeah,
exactly. Yep.
that's awesome. So when did you decide though that and how did you decide? Like to me that's a lot of resilience,
Mhm.
that's a lot of perseverance, a lot of strength to be able to say like, I'm doing this. So how did that happen? When did that shift or did you always feel that from very young? Like, nope, I don't believe anything they're telling me. Or was there a time where like, yep, I'll just take that on and go through
I
life?
I think one of the things that it was really, amazing, even looking back on having a disability from when I was young, is not being accepted by my peers, and
Hmm.
I was also an only child for 13 years. I learned how to be an independent person with a
Mm,
lot of my own interests and a lot of my
okay.
own strengths, so I knew a lot about myself, and
Hmm.
I can remember one of the first things I found out I was good at was reading and writing. My dad found a story that I wrote in 2nd or 3rd grade about a dinosaur and said it was really good. And that just gave
Oh.
me that encouragement because I didn't think I was good at anything.
Mm,
I thought every learning was such a struggle, especially math. And I thought, wow, I am good at something. And my dad read me a story every night when I was little. And I learned to fall in
hmm.
love with books and writing. And reading and writing really became my world. And I was also really good at speaking. I can remember at church, we would have our class would take over for a mass and I had the chance they always gave me the passages to read with some of the biblical words that were kind of hard to pronounce because they knew that I could read well and that I could speak. So they really emphasized that. And even when I went to school, my teachers noticed in regular ed that I could get up in front of the class and I could do presentations. So that was something they encouraged me and
Nice.
reading and that. So I knew what my interests are and I were and still are. And I knew what I wasn't very good at too. And I also had a passion though to work with students. I knew that I wanted to work with kids in a setting, and I knew I loved to write. I knew those were things I really wanted to do. But I also understood that being a certified teacher probably wasn't going to be the best path for me because I couldn't pass some of the certification tests.
Mm,
But I knew that that was the path I was supposed to be on. So when I had a learning support teacher who said, "Why don't you go to Votech?" I already knew myself and I was thinking, I don't want to struggle in some of these courses. I knew if I went into uh, taking a class in cosmetology, I probably would cut somebody's hair wrong, or I would probably, I don't know how I would do with styling. I also knew what math was involved with cooking. And later on, I mean, I can even remember the teacher was telling me, well, you may not be able to be a teacher, but we can get you to take these classes if something happens in an emergency. And I'm not able to drive because of my disability. So I knew that wouldn't be something I can go drive a police car or an ambulance. So I just knew that wasn't the path for me. And it was really clear that I was going to need to go to college. And I took a lot of
mhm,
heat for that. I can remember I knew the learning support teacher wasn't happy about that, but even my peers didn't understand it. A lot of my peers who went to learning support, that just seemed like that was the default option because they didn't want to go to college.
mhm.
And one of my peers was asked that they had people that came to the school to talk to us about some of the programs that were offered. And one of my peers said, "Aren't you going to go?" And I said, "No, none of the programs interest me. Why would I want to waste my time?" And she goes, "Well, I would go even if I wasn't interested just to get out of school." Investing that time in school is what really helped me in life. And then whenever I decided that I was definitely going to college and I had it all set up, I went in afraid. I just had to go forward with not knowing if I was going to pass. And having that stigma that still followed me at college with people, faculty, and students thinking that disability accommodations were cheating, asking me, when I asked for a calculator, they said, we use our brains in this class, getting a note, all those support services. I even had a professor that told me, whenever you graduate, you're going to have limited job choices. And I didn't know what the future was, but I knew that I was going to go forward and I was going to try. And when I got my associate's degree in early childhood education, I moved out on my own and I really enjoyed that, but I always wanted more for myself. And when I had to move back in with my parents for financial reasons, I decided I was just going to try this. And I found a program at university that had the least amount of math and science possible. And I also knew I had that maturity. So I knew if I didn't do well in a class or I didn't do well on a test, it was not the end of the world.
Mhm.
And this time I made sure I used all those accommodations and those services and I advocated for myself. And there was always going to be somebody that was going to say something, but I just learned to put that out of my head and it worked for me. I was able to get a bachelor's degree despite being told I couldn't do it.
That is amazing. That is awesome.
Thank you.
So I know with talking with some other people, that there are times, and this will, you can decide if you want to speak to this or not, because it really kind of goes back to what's coming to my mind is I've talked to parents that their children have learning disabilities and
Mhm,
things, and they go through a struggle with that. And because of what I do with grief
mhm.
coaching, they speak to that as grief, that they are not, they're grieving what they thought that their child would be able to do. And did you feel that with your parents? And then also with you, like grieving the fact that you were going to struggle and you were going to, all of those things were going to be different for you. And you sound super positive and moving forward, but I just want to dig a little deeper. Was there times where it's like,
Right,
I want to give up. Like this is too hard. But
right.
so both sides of that, your kind of grief in that and how that was. But then if you can speak to like your parents, if you know, but if you don't, that's okay too.
I think that was hard for them in a
Yeah.
sense because my dad was really good with math. So I think that idea that he might have a child that's not, I think that was something that they had to grieve. And I also think they had to do that too because they knew people that went through learning support services and they didn't have a great experience. So that was
Mm,
very hard for
mm,
them. And I think sometimes it was difficult just to you have a child, first time parents. My mom I was the only child for 13 years, so I was their first one. So I do think that there was at that point maybe some expectations where that's something they had to work through, but they did a wonderful job with that. They really worked with the school on how to create a program to help me be successful in my life.
mhm.
Now, for
Okay.
me, I can look back on it that it was a grieving process for me because all I wanted to do whenever I started out school was learn and make my parents proud, which I already did. And I wanted to have friends, and that was really hard for me. And I kind of sometimes there was that grieving process that I had to look at my life. I had to realize that in order for me to survive in going to school and get good grades and make honor roll and be able to learn, I was going to have to go to learning support, and that carries a stigma with it. And I had to grieve that. I also just with the experience, I mean, I'm not able to drive because of my disability. And whenever we went through the testing, it was like 100 pounds that was lifted off of me. But still, there's not that experience that I got to go get my driver's license or that. So that was
Mhm,
something that I had
mhm,
to replan with my life. But I think it helped that I had friends that were older and were outside of school.
mhm,
So they took me places. So I didn't really feel like I was missing out on a whole lot of things,
mhm,
but I had to, re uh, plan my life. And I can also know that whenever I was making those decisions on what I wanted to do with my life, that's also a loss I had to grieve because I couldn't just go and have these dreams where everybody would say, "Oh, you can do whatever you put your mind to." I knew there were some limitations. So that was
Yeah.
a grieving process for me. And I was very negative during that time. I
Yeah.
was that person that just didn't think I could do it. I thought my life would just be perfect if I didn't have the disability and I could just be successful. And I've had success, but my disability didn't go away when I graduated. It didn't go away when I published my first article, but I was able to find joy and to be able to find happiness. And I think a lot of that was just working through some of those feelings with having that disability and to get me to that point where I'm accepting who I am today.
That's awesome. I think anytime that people go through
Mhm.
transition struggles or
Yeah.
whatever, we love them. We get to the other side of it, and we don't want to dwell on the
Yeah.
process necessarily. But I do know that that's a difficult time. And I
Yep.
want to make sure because of the people listening, the listeners, like, yeah, everything's wonderful now, but I want to know how she got through those struggles, what
Mhm.
really happened to get through some of that.
Right.
And it sounds like your parents were so supportive and amazing,
Right.
and you deciding to really kind of shift that. But it sounds like you were kind of in it for a little bit,
Yes.
struggling with probably frustration, probably
Mhm.
some, I don't know, these are my words, not your words, just words that are coming to my head, but some shame and disappointment even in yourself. But I love that you had support. I just know there was support somewhere there to help motivate and push you
Yes.
to get through those things. And it could be teachers or parents or whatever. Do you remember anyone significant that was like that believed in you and was like, okay, I got this. I can do this.
Parents that never gave up on me. We spent a lot
That's
of long,
awesome.
tearful homework sessions together, and they encouraged
Mm-hmm.
me and they advocated for me because when I went to school, students did not go to their IEP meeting. So my mom and dad would say that they had a IEP meeting coming up for me. And is there anything that I wanted to talk about? And I would, and they would report back on the things that were discussed. So I think that was important. I
Mm-hmm.
also had a student teacher whenever I was in high school that told me, you can go to college with having a learning disability. And I was so surprised. I
Yeah.
thought, I didn't know anybody. I mostly knew all the books were about white men that had dyslexia. So I didn't know anybody that had a math disability. And she's like, you know how to study. You're smart. And those are the words that played back in my head when it got really hard. I don't remember what her name was, but I wish I did because I would love to thank
Oh.
her for that support because that was one of those people that did that. And I've also been blessed to have friends in my writing group for adults that were a few years older as I got to meet them as a teenager. And they are the ones too that really could be my friend. They couldn't fix that I had a learning disability, but we could go out and we could laugh on the weekends. And they also encouraged me to write about having a learning disability. And I was not ready for that at 17 or 18. And it took me well until my adulthood to be able to write about that many, many, many years later.
So let's talk to that a little bit. Like,
Mhm.
what does that all look like? What you're doing now? You're a writer, you're a speaker, photographer,
Mhm.
all the things. So, how did that all transition? You went to school, you got those degrees. You said, did you say preschool? What was your
Mhm.
degree in? And how did that all transition? Is that what you're still doing? Or how did that all transition to a
Sure.
writer, a speaker, a photographer? Like, put all these little pieces we got together for us.
I always loved reading and writing. That was something I always
Mhm.
loved from the time I was very young. And I also knew that I was going to have to probably have another job alongside that. And for years, I got my associate's degree in early childhood education. I worked in some school settings and I went back to school and I got my bachelor's degree in community programming for Americans with disabilities. During that time, I also met my husband and we got married few years after I graduated. And I also ended up finding a job as a paraeducator in a school. I began working as a one on one with the student, but now I work as a seventh grade para, and I travel to different classrooms where I get that chance to work with students who have disabilities and some who don't. And I find it really rewarding to work with them because a lot of
Mm,
times it's like hearing that voice or recording of myself at that age. I hate my learning disability. I don't feel like I'm smart, and some of the kids really struggle. And I get to be that reassuring voice to tell them they are smart, that they just learn differently. And I also just can really empathize with them because I've been there before.
yeah.
I just had this conversation with a student the other day. He was really frustrated with his math, and all the kids know I cannot help you with math. I can read you the questions, but I can't help you. And he's like, I'm just so frustrated with this. And I said, I know how you feel. I said, I can remember being your age and being really frustrated with doing math. And I know what that's like. And I know it still makes me frustrated today. And I was able to empathize with that person. And I think to myself, if I didn't have the disability, I could definitely feel sympathy, but I don't think I would really know how that person is feeling. So
Mhm.
that has really helped me a lot. And then with the writing, I thought for many years, I did not want to write about having a learning disability. I wrote some bad poetry and some other stuff I wouldn't want to read today. And finally, whenever I got married, we moved into a house and I could not unlock our door. And I was so frustrated that there was a call on the mighty for what's a seemingly easy task for other people, but it's hard with your disability. And I was just diagnosed with limited hand dexterity about a year or so before that. And I finally got the courage to write about it. And I'm so glad I did because I had such a great response that I decided to write more articles for them. And I started to write for other places and to start my own blog called Michelle's Mission, where I write about my learning disability. And I also feature my photography. The photography was another thing that came up. Whenever I was in high school, I took a picture of a tree at prom. And all my peers were like, why'd you take a picture of a tree? And when I went to the writing group, a woman in the group said, that shows perspective. And I put it on the shelf for so many years because I thought, I'm not an artist. I can't draw a straight line. I can't
Mhm.
draw a person. And my husband and I were at a wedding and I took pictures of angels in the cemetery. And I had a friend that looked at the pictures and she said, wow, these are really good. This friend did not flatter people. So I thought, well, if she thinks that it's really good, it must be. And I entered them into an art show and I got an honorable mention. And that
Nice.
just encouraged me to start entering more shows and taking more pictures. And another thing that I noticed is because I can't drive, if I don't have a ride to get somewhere, I end up on a walk. And sometimes I get to notice details that other people will miss. And I get to stop and smell the roses. And I could take a picture of a flower. And if I was driving, there are so many things in my life that I would miss, and
Mhm.
I get that chance to be able to show that on my blog and to be able to combine that, with my writing.
I love that. Just the perspective, like the shift in things, because I think sometimes that even like how do you survive without being able to drive? Just that in itself. But I do know there are people that are the same thing. Like I have a friend that has seizures, so never able to
Yep.
drive, doesn't have it very often, but had them enough that cannot get a driver's license.
Right.
Of course, we do know people, we all probably know people that can't drive because their license has been taken away or
Yeah.
whatever, but I don't really think about that, I guess because they've
Mhm.
always had the ability to do it. But just when you speaking of it, it's like, oh gosh, like that would be hard. But I guess you just get used to it and you just
You
get adjusted to that, like you ask friends and get
you
around.
and
There's ways for transportation,
yes.
bicycles and buses and Uber now.
And that's part of one of the things where I planned my life. Whenever I
Mhm.
had that diagnosis, I thought to myself, okay, I like being in a setting where I can take myself places anyways. So
Mhm.
I knew wherever I got a house at, wherever I got a job at, I was going to need to be able to take care of myself with a lot of that. But I am also blessed though to have support. My husband's able to take me to work in the morning. I have a sweet coworker that take me home at the end of the day, and I'm also
Mhm.
live close enough to my job that I'm able to walk to work and back if I need to. And
Mhm.
I'm close enough to the gym, I'm close enough to the stores and wherever else I need to go. So, I mean, it was just about adjusting my life for that. And
Mhm.
that also has led to I couldn't get a place out in the country. I did make it work with my
Right.
parents, but it just works out better for me because I can be more independent if I live in a place where I'm able to take myself around.
Awesome. What would you say to someone, because you've obviously you had indicated
Mhm,
with students and stuff that you can empathize and you can understand, which I think is beautiful
mhm.
that you do that, because just the encouragement that you can give that maybe I cannot, because I'm not experienced that.
Right.
But coming from someone that is living that is so much more powerful. But what would you say if there's somebody listening today? What would you say to those people that are struggling right now, like where you were when there was the most frustration and all of that? If you can kind of summarize that, and maybe it's just a limitation or it's a disability or there's sorts of things that could play a part in that. But what would you say to them directly?
One of the first things I would tell them to do is not to give up. That would be the first thing.
Uh-huh.
And that things do really work out at the end if you put forth that effort. And I think
Mhm.
it's knowing what you want is a big thing because you're the one that has to have the motivation and the drive,
Mhm.
even when it's hard, and to find a way to be able to do it. I think that's a really key thing too. Look for different resources that are out there that can help you. Look for maybe a different way to approach the problem or just something that you can do that might just be different. And I also love to tell people that success doesn't always come in the package with, that we expect. Sometimes it comes into something even better in our lives.
The other question that I have of
Mhm,
you is how can, I'm going to say, educator, employer, our community better
mhm.
support those living with what I'm going to say is like those hidden disabilities that you don't see. We see some people with
Mhm.
disabilities, physical disabilities, but
Right.
many times with a learning disability, we can't see that. So, how can they do better in supporting those with those hidden disabilities?
One of the first
Big
things
thing I would say is stop judging people. That's what I would say.
I would agree. That is the first thing, is understanding that they're real. Because a lot of times people will tell me, "Well, you don't look like you're disabled." And they think that that's a compliment. And really, there's nothing wrong with being disabled, whether you can see it or you can't see it. And I have to
Yeah.
explain that. And
Hmm.
I also think it's creating programs and creating plans that have a customized approach because all too often we want to just put this rubber stamp on everybody and say, well, you're just like everybody else. And why don't you want to do
Hmm.
this program? And I think
Hmm.
we really need to be looking at that as the person as a whole and as definitely an individual as well.
That's awesome. Yeah. We as a society could do, I think, a much
Hmm.
better job
Hmm.
with those. I think there are areas, there
Yeah,
probably are companies, there probably are schools and communities that
right.
do really, really well, but overall, I don't think
Yeah.
we do. I'll just say, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm living under a rock or whatever, but I still think there's a lot that
Right.
can be put in place to support. And I think with me with grief, many, many times people do judge like what's
Hmm.
wrong with them.
Right.
And they could have just lost someone very significant to them and they're very crabby or down or emotional or whatever. And we are very quick as a society to
Yes.
judge like what is wrong with them, like kind of thing. So yeah, I think just being aware and giving people grace
Mhm.
is just so, so important. So you talked about your writing. So you do a blog. Do you want to share a little more about that? Did you ever write the book or is it just your writing is all within a blog? Share with us what's out there, especially if we have listeners
Mhm.
that are struggling with that, that know someone that has a disability, like that hidden disability, I'll call it. Share with us what you've got. If they want to connect, read something that
Sure.
you have or what you've put out there, I would love that.
I read a lot of blog posts about nature, so I might talk about the process of accepting my disability as like a butterfly that's transforming. And then I might have a picture of my some the butterflies that I might have captured. And I don't have my own book, but I've had my stories published in 4 anthologies and they are available. I have the links for them on my website as well. I've guest blog for other people as well, and
Mhm.
I've also wrote a news article when I made my first solo trip to Orlando, Florida 3 years ago. And I was able to write about that using some of the disability services. But someday I do want to get that book out there that is my own about my life story and to educate people
Mhm.
about learning disabilities, especially dyscalculia, because there's so many misunderstandings about it.
Well, real quick, can you say what all those anthologies, the names of those are? And we'll link that all in the show notes, your website, so people can find all of that through your website, right?
Sure, yes, they
Your
can,
blog and
definitely.
everything. Okay, but real quick, just give us some names, so things we might look
The first one was Rediscover Your Story, and
for.
that was one where I went to a workshop where people that had mental health issues, I was the only one that had a learning disability, talked to we got together and we would write different prompts. Some of them were about our hair or our favorite place, and one of them I wrote about was the biggest life lesson I learned, and we put them in an anthology. The second one that got out was the baggage we carry. It was an anthology about baggage. So I talked about the baggage about having a learning disability.
Mm,
The third anthology was called Through Our Lens. And that was different people with disabilities wrote about what life is like with that and their experience. And then the last one, most recent, was Tough Kids. And that was an anthology where people wrote about the theme of a tough kid. And I wrote about how my learning disability made me tough.
the titles sound amazing, and in your description of them. So those all sound like wonderful books to read, and I'm sure there are other authors in there
Yes.
that are amazing as well. Yeah, I've been in an anthology myself.
Mhm.
It's called
Nice.
Perfectly Imperfect. So I
Mm,
just really like them because there's so many authors that can be a part
mhm.
of that book and share their story. Because sometimes it's a little intimidating to write a whole book,
Yeah.
but it gives you the opportunity to really express some things and write
Mhm.
part of your story without having to write a whole book, which can be overwhelming. Maybe someday for me too, not right now. It's
Yeah.
not top priority, but yeah, I would love to stay connected if you
Yes.
do put that book out there. And we'll make sure that we link all that in the show notes so that people can grab those through your website. So, anything else that you wanted to share that I did not ask a question about that you think would be super important for people
I think
to
that we
hear?
covered everything.
Okay, that's awesome. So, Michelle, thank you so much for sharing all of that information, like your courage in doing that, being so honest and vulnerable to share with us. I love that you're speaking about this to really support other people. Your story is just such a reminder, too, that grief doesn't only
Mhm.
follow death, it is also come when life looks very
Yes.
different than what we have planned for sure. So it shows up there too. And just accepting that we can work
Mhm.
through that and come out the other side very resilient and strong for sure. So for the listeners, Michelle's story, if it resonates with you, if you know someone that it would benefit for them to hear her story here on the episode, please share this, like it, share it, so others can hear and then they can read those other books to encourage them on their path to success because we do definitely wish all of them great success even with those hidden disabilities like Michelle has. So share it, like it, put it out there so we can support and help so many other people. And then until next time, I'm Teresa Reiniger here at Female Voices Life and Loss. Enjoy your day and do it with love.